Well, it's as always exciting to be here with you. And not just that we get to spend time together, but we get to spend time doing something that is very powerful, and that is we get to worship in truth and spirit. And I pray that's exactly what happens today. We're going to kick off a new series called Obey, and very excited about it today. But as we come together in truth and spirit, could we bring our hearts and our minds and our spirits together to do one thing, and that is to bring God glory, to exalt Jesus, to take focus off of self and place it on the Creator and bow down before Him and worship Him. I pray that we would come in with this strong anticipation of encountering the living God, and not just for our own sakes, but for the glory of Him and exaltation of Him. I pray that's your heart today. Let's spend a few moments worshiping through song, and then we're going to jump in this new series.
People came from all over to hear Jesus teach and preach about the kingdom of God. On one occasion, a massive crowd gathered outside the synagogue to hear him speak. Like any crowd, they were coming from many different places and many different perspectives. Young and old, men and women, rich and poor. But every person in that crowd had this one thing in common. They were tired. Tired of life. Tired of religion. Tired of waiting. And so he looked out upon this multitude of people who were scared, confused, and tired. And he told them, "Come to me." And that offer still stands for every one of us. Come to Jesus. All who are tired, all who are hurting, all who feel unworthy, all who feel unloved, all who have nothing left to give, come to Jesus. Bring your burdens, bring your fears, bring your biggest regrets and your worst mistakes. Bring your broken dreams and your painful disappointments. Bring your chains and bring your addictions. Bring it all and come to Jesus. Because He will receive you, and He will redeem you. He will love you, and He will lead you. He will accept you and forgive you. He will guide you and comfort you. He will care for you and watch over you. He will transform you and sustain you. So all who are weary, all who are lost, all who are tired, come as you are. Come today. Come to Jesus.
Worship the God who is. We worship the God who evermore will be. He opened the prison doors. He parted the raging sea. Our God, He holds the victory. There's joy in the house of the Lord. There's joy in the house of the Lord today. We won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. Our God is surely in this place. We won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. We sing to the God who heals. We sing to the God who saves. We sing to the God who always makes a way. 'Cause He hung up on that cross. He rose up from that grave. My God, still rolling stones away. There's joy in the house the Lord sing praise. 'Cause we were the beggars, now we're royalty. We were the prisoners, now we're running free. We are forgiven, accepted, redeemed by His grace. Let the house of the Lord sing praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. There's joy in the house of the Lord today. And we won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. Our God is surely in this place. And we won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. There's joy in the house of the Lord today. And we won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. Our God is surely in this place. And we won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. We shout out your praise. We shout out your praise.
So this week we're starting a new series called Obey. And very excited about this. It's, I think, a 3 or 4 week series that we'll be spending some time talking about this concept of obeying and what that looks like within our relationship with God. But if you look at this, if you look at the screen and you can see that it says Obey back here, it kind of reminds us of the eBay logo, doesn't it? I would like to create another one that would have Obey and have the smiley face, the smile with the arrow with Amazon. And I don't know if you're familiar with Amazon's logo, but that, you know how it looks like a smile underneath of it with an arrow at the end pointing to the Z, so it goes from A to Z. And what that means is it's this big place where you can buy anything from A to Z. That's what their logo is supposed to represent. Nevertheless, we're going to look at kind of eBay here. eBay you're familiar with as well. I think eBay came out before Amazon, and eBay was this place is this place that still exists. I've purchased things off eBay numerous times where you can go and it's like a big auction. You can bid on things or you can buy now, but it's just a place that has tons of merchandise, used merchandise that you can purchase a little bit cheaper. Do you know what the first product was that was sold on eBay? A laser pen or pencil, a laser pencil, you know, the laser pointer, which was broke. And I think it sold for what, $14 and some change? A little trivia. Not sure if you knew that, just a little trivia. But nevertheless, eBay is a place, if you can think about it, it's a place where, you know, we go to find something that we're looking for, find something that maybe something nostalgic, right? Something that we had as a kid, and we're like, you know what, I would like to have one of those Mattel handheld digital football games that I had back in the 70s when they first came out. And so you could go on eBay, and sure enough, you can look and you can find something like that and just have a piece of your childhood, which is quite interesting. And it brings us what? Or we think it brings us joy and happiness. Now, last week we talked about this. Last week I opened up. We were in Philippians, and we were looking at the life of Paul. We read in chapter 4 where Paul said that he had found the secret of being content, right? And that was in any given circumstance he could be content, regardless if it was physical, financial, clothing, whatever it may be. Paul said he could be content. He found the secret of being content. Now, we have places like Amazon, and I'm not here to demonize Amazon or eBay because I surely buy more than my share of stuff from both these places, probably more from Amazon because they got Prime and they got that second day shipping and all this other stuff. And so if I'm looking for something, I mean, it really caters to that impulsive buying, right? Because I want this and I want it now because it's going to make me happy. It's going to fulfill my needs, or I have something that's broke and I need to replace it and I need it right now, right? And so these places are kind of built on the premise of bringing more joy to our lives and fulfillment and things like that. And for some of us, we can live our lives in that lie. And so we're going to talk about that in this series. And we're going to talk about how obey is a little bit different, right? And it's kind of it kind of sounds like a paradox, right? Like, you know, I have eBay and Amazon that can supply me any of my heart's wishes if I have the resources, if I have the money, and consequently, that should make me happy. But yet, what we're going to discover through this series, that it's when we obey, that's when we find life, and we find life to the fullest. When we obey God, okay? Now, that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to kind of jump into that. And in fact, Jesus says in John 10:10, He says this very clearly. He said, I came that they may have life and have life to the full, or have life to the fullest, depending on what translation you're using. Jesus says it's not going to Amazon, it's not going to eBay, it's not going to the materialistic side of things, it's not resorting to that human flesh that's going to bring joy and fulfillment that you're truly looking for, but it's me. It's in the person, it's in the relationship. And so that's where we want to really concentrate in, because even when He said that, that's in John chapter 10, verse 10. If we would go to John chapter 14 and read through I'm just going to read a couple verses from chapter 14, verses 15 and 23, but that whole segment, all those verses in there, He's really stating the same thing. In verse 15 of that chapter 14, He says this, if you love me, you will keep my commands. You will obey my commands. You will keep my commands. Right? That's what He's saying. If you love me, you will obey me. You will keep my commands. Later in verse 23, He answers and says it again, if anyone loves me, he will keep my word. So there's this connection. I think we can see it very clearly, that there's this connection between our obedience, between obeying Him, knowing His word, knowing His commands, and understanding them, and not just cognitively knowing them, but actually living them out. There is this connection between obedience and the life that we truly want to have. Life to the fullest. Okay? Now, this is a very integral part of being a Christian. And somehow we almost kind of make it optional. It's so easy to make it optional, especially when we talk about obeying, obedience, doing what God says to do, living out His purpose within our lives. Those things are very integral to being a Christ follower. Very integral. And I think at times we become deceived and almost elevate them to a position of being optional. It's quite interesting if you are familiar with the person of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who lived back during World War II there with the Nazis. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer was an incredible mind, a Christian of the 20th century. He was actually executed for his resistance against the Nazis. But Bonhoeffer says this. He makes a statement. He says this, only he who believes obeys, and only he who obeys believes. All right? And we'll talk a little bit more about Bonhoeffer and some of his other thoughts, and especially as he wrote this in the Cost of Discipleship, a book called The Cost of Discipleship. And so here's the deal. Basing it on the premise of what Bonhoeffer said, which I think he's right, but let's say if he's right, he's connecting obedience to belief. Meaning that there's all kinds of people that say that they believe in God, but they really don't obey God. They don't know His commands. They don't follow His commands. But if Bonhoeffer is right, only those who obey are the ones who truly believe. That's a very powerful thought. That's a thought to maybe stop and ponder on. Because all sorts of people say that they believe in God, but they don't necessarily live out His commands or even know His words. And Jesus says, if you love me, you will obey me. You will live out my commands. You will know my words if you love me. And there's that connection that very powerful integral connection between what we believe and how we live that out. So if we say that we believe in God and we believe in Jesus, then that, which Jesus is God, but if we believe in God, that Jesus says, you will obey me. You will live out my commands. And I think that's exactly what Dietrich Bonhoeffer is just capitulating out or extrapolating out, saying this: only he who believes obeys, and only he who obeys believes. Now, what I want to do is, as we go through this series, we're going to look at different individuals, different characters throughout the Scripture, a few in the Old Testament here. I want to start with Adam and Eve. And I think this can set the premise for this series very clearly for us, because Adam and Eve were the first. This is the backstory that we need to understand. And we probably all recognize, I'm guessing that probably all of us recognize or have heard that first verse in the Bible. In the beginning, God created, right? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And then it says, and we're just going to kind of cruise through that first chapter very quickly, but it says that God said, let there be light, and there was light, and God said it was good. Then later he says, God says, let there be a sky and ocean and land, and there was sky, ocean, and land, and God said it was good. And God said, let the oceans be full of swimming creatures and the skies be full of flying creatures. And it was so, and I'm kind of paraphrasing some of this, and it was so, and God said it was good. That is correct. Then God said, let there be animals, let there be livestock, let there be wild animals, And He said it was good. And then, if all of this wasn't enough, God's creating all of these things. He's creating the heavens and the earth. He's creating the things that filled the heaven and the earth, the expansion between the sky. And God said, it was good. It was good. It was good. If that wasn't enough, then we read about, of all the creatures that God creates, He creates His pinnacle creature, which was mankind, which was humankind, human beings. And that's why, after God created human beings, God said that it wasn't just good, He said it was very good. And so we read on that God places, He creates all of this. He creates this Garden of Eden, this paradise, which He places, and we talked about this back in the story when we went through that 31-week biblical survey, and we touched on a little bit of this. But God creates paradise. He calls it the Garden of Eden, and He places the first people within this Garden of Eden. And so then what we see is we have all of creation, all that God created and said it was good, and human beings, which God said was very good. And God is the creator. God is the designer, the one who dreamed all this up. And we just have this incredible picture of everything that was good and very good. And the Bible tells us, too, that Adam and Eve were not clothed, right? They were naked, but yet they were unashamed. And I'm not so sure that means, it's from a physical perspective, which it kind of is. But I think it has to do a little bit more with they lived in harmony. They lived in this harmonious, honest, loving relationship with themselves and with the Creator, with God. Think about it. There was no manipulation. There was no games. There was no mind games, no head games, no narcissism. There was none of this stuff, no pretense, because they had nothing to hide. There was nothing to prove. There was nothing to be defensive about. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine how great and harmonious that was? And that was how it was taking place. There was not only was their relationship, again, as I just shared with you, not only was their relationship like that with one another. I mean, face it, men and women getting along, speaking the same language, thinking the same things, right? There was no tension, none of that. And I do believe, I joke, but I do believe that after chapter 3 of Genesis, and we read how everything, which we'll talk about here in just a minute, how everything kind of went to, where in a handbasket, that's part of the curse. And so now we have these things. Sin has entered into the world. But before we get there for a second, it was all good. And from the beginning, God said, He even gave them a couple things to do. He even gave them a couple commands, which were really cool. He told them, be fruitful and go multiply. I mean, come on, that's pretty cool. That's a command we can all get behind and obey, right? Let's be fruitful and multiply. We got that one down pat, right? But that was the commands, right? That's what God told them to do. It wasn't a bad command to follow, right? It was a good command. It was an awesome command. And God also told them to take charge of the world. He told them to manage it and steward it on His behalf. You oversee these things. You steward. You know, and it sounds like it would have been a huge, magnanimous job, but think about it. Everything was good. Sin hadn't entered into the world yet. And so it had to have been somewhat good, and it had to have been somewhat a little bit easier to command and manage because there was absolutely nothing wrong with it. It's how the designer created it, and everything was perfect at that particular point in time. So all sorts of things God told them to do, and God instructed them to do, and everything was great. Everything was harmonious. But of course, there was one thing that God told them not to do, right? He told them not to what? He commanded them not to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And they didn't. They didn't. They lived in that for a while, and things were great until, we know it happened. But let me read it to you. In Genesis chapter 3, verses 2 and 3, as it starts off, it says this, now the serpent, meaning Satan the devil, now the serpent was the most cunning of all the wild animals that the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, did God really say you can't eat from any tree in the garden? The woman said to the serpent, we may eat the fruit from trees in the garden, but about the fruit of the tree in the middle of the garden, God said, you must not eat it, touch it, or you will die. So Eve begins to talking. This is really interesting, though. Think about it. In our world today, be like, a talking snake? Let's run from that. That doesn't sound good whatsoever. But think about it. Everything was good at that time. And so she didn't even really think twice about it, which is intriguing, but it's what it was, right? It's what it was. But listen to what the serpent says. In verse 4, he says this, no, you will not die. So as he talked to her, he presented the lie, the deception, right? Did God really say you can't eat of any tree of the, No, that's not what he said. And she clarified, no, he said we could eat of all the fruit of the trees, just one. Just one, not all of, just one, right? And she said, God said you must not eat it or touch it or you will die. And then the serpent replies in verse 4 and he says this, no, you will not die, the serpent said to the woman. In fact, God knows that when you eat, your eyes will be opened and you will become like God, knowing good and evil. Now, I want you to notice the angle that he took. I want you to know the deception here. I want you to see and take note of where he's coming from, okay? He doesn't say, hey, listen, why does God get to call the shots? Why are you going to let God boss you around? Why are you going to let God tell you what to do? Right? He doesn't really take that angle whatsoever. Okay? If you see it there, the serpent says that if they refuse to obey, if they will just live life by doing their own terms, doing their own bidding instead of God, then they will not die. But who will they become like? They will become like God. And the serpent is basically saying this, don't be the creature, be the creator. You see that? You don't want to be the creature. Now, do you? You want to be the creator. And what's really interesting, from this point on to this day, we look at these passages of Scripture in the Old Testament and things like that, and we look at it, and it's easy to superimpose on God that God is this restrictive person that doesn't want us to have fun, that He always wants us to, hold back on all this, but that wasn't the case whatsoever. That's not what God was doing. God was saying, no, I want you to have life like Jesus. I want you to have life to the full. I want you to experience true life. And in order to experience true life, you can't do this. And if you do this, this will happen. Okay? So God wasn't coming and saying, here are a list of rules. I am the one that wants to shut down everybody having fun around here. And that's not what it is. And it's not a story of God tempting them or tantalizing them, okay? Or trying to trip them up or trap them. Again, God is showing them the difference between morality and immorality. That word good is the same word that God used when He created things. When he created creatures and, He created all these different things and He said it was good, very good. That good and evil doesn't just mean right and wrong, but it also means this. It's more about blessing and suffering. Okay, that's what it really is. It's more about blessing and suffering. Because before there was disobedience, Adam and Eve, the only thing they experienced was what? They experienced joy. They experienced joyful, meaningful, fulfilling lives. That's what they experienced. They didn't experience any of this other stuff. Their lives as creatures were good and suffering and destruction free. They didn't experience any of that negative whatsoever. God didn't say, hey, if you do this, it's going to tick me off and I'm going to drop the boot. I'm going to send fire down on top of you. That's not what He said. He talked about dying. It says that day you eat of it, you will surely what? You will die. And die here does not mean drop dead physically. What it means is you're going to go from blessing to suffering. You're going to go from this incredible joy that you're experiencing, this incredible harmonious relationship that we have together, that you have not only with you guys together and us together, but all of my creation together. If that's what takes place, then it's going to create suffering and pain for everything. And in Genesis chapter 3, verse 6, it says that the woman saw that the tree was good for food and delightful to look at, and that it was desirable for obtaining wisdom. So she took some of its fruit and ate it. And she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. And God said, that is what's going to bring pain and suffering and diminish life. She ate it. She got Adam to eat it. They both took, they ate, and everything started breaking apart. Everything started coming apart at the seams. Managing things became very hard and toilsome. Go back and read the curse. Work becomes very hard and toilsome. Childbirth becomes very painful. The joy of having children is tainted now. Relationships are getting screwed up between man and woman. Everything is just going to pot. And now that they not only know joy, but they know what it means to suffer. Good and evil. So what does this have to do with obeying, right? Let's put it all together. What does this have to do? Because the story is trying to tell us something here. Obeying God is not about just following His rules. It's not just about towing some religious restrictive line, right? This religious line that we got to be do-gooders and all this other stuff. Obeying is about experiencing life as creatures, that of which is awesome and good of the loving Creator. That's what obeying means. Obeying means that we get to experience life as God intended it. And when, that first temptation to disobey was to reject the life that was given to us as creatures. Now, that word creature, I think, can have a very bad taste in our mouths at times. And I think in our society today, it really does. Because we've got to eradicate, because if we're a creature, that means there's a creator, right? That means there's a creator. That means someone has created me. I'm just a product. I am a creature. And I can't have that. Why? Because you can see it. It's all this usurping. Again, it goes back to goes back to the lie that Satan told. It wasn't about God, the angle that he took. You be the creator. You don't want to be the creature. You want to be the creator. And I think in our world today, it's exactly what we're experiencing. And so we eradicate absolutes. We eradicate absolute truth. We eradicate God because we don't want anybody over us. Now we get to define what is moral. Now we get to define what is right and what is wrong. The problem with that, though, is this. We are a creature. There is a creator. And all we're experiencing is pain and suffering because we're trying to usurp God's authority. Obeying God means that we live in harmony with our Creator. The temptation for Adam and Eve was really not about breaking rules or being naughty. It was to seek their life on their own based on whatever looked good to them and seems right to them. And this didn't just happen here, but it's happening now, as I just shared with you. It's the story then, it's the story now. It's your story, it's my story, where we want to be the creator at times. And that is the temptation. It's my story and your story. And here's the thing. As appealing as that sounds at times, let's be honest, because that's what makes it a temptation. As appealing as that may sound at times, Proverbs 14:12, Solomon writes this, and he coins it. There is a way that seems right to a man, but in the end, it leads to death. Oh, but I love that. I love that. I want that because I know if I get that, that will make me happy. Even if God disapproves, even if I'm in this relationship with someone I know I shouldn't be in this relationship with, I want that. I want that. And I know that if I can get that, it's going to make me happy. But it doesn't because we're usurping who God is. We're usurping who God is. And we want to be the creator versus the creature. Some of us may say, you know what? I've been living my life up to this point, and it's been okay. It's been all right. As one person said it, I think this is very key. I think this is very to the point. He says, disobedience is like being exposed to carcinogenic stuff. You really don't get sick right away, but sometimes you begin to get just a little bit sicker and sicker in years later. How many of our choices have made us sicker and sicker years later? How many of our choices can we look back and say, man, if I would have just made a different choice, if I would have just trusted God, if I would have just obeyed, if I would have just did what the Word of God teaches, His commands, if I would have understood them, well, how my life might look different. As we talked about Dietrich Bonhoeffer a little bit earlier, again, I shared with you his book, one of his most famous books was The Cost of Discipleship. And he rallied against, or not rallied, but he railed against what he would call easy believism. And easy believism says this: grace is free and grace is cheap, and it doesn't really have to cost you anything. And we reduce God's grace down to nothing is what we do. But Bonhoeffer said this: it's not easy believism. Grace comes at a high cost. And he said, obedience is the cost of discipleship. It's the cost of following Jesus. It's saying no to self. It's saying, no, I'm not elevating myself to the position of God. I am not the creator. I am the creature. We've quoted Dallas Willard a lot around here. He was an incredible professor of philosophy at USC, Christian guy. If you've had the opportunity to read The Divine Conspiracy or even chew on it, it is an incredible book. But he says in The Divine Conspiracy, he says this: as costly as discipleship may be, costlier is still non-discipleship. Non-discipleship costs abiding peace, a life permeated by love and faith, a life that sees everything in the light of God's overriding governance for good, a life of hopefulness that stands firm in the most discouraging of circumstances, a life of power to do what is right and withstand evil. In short, non-discipleship costs exactly that abundance of life Jesus said He came to bring, life lived on its highest plane. I couldn't agree with him more. Here's the deal as we close today. How do we bring this together? It's about obeying. It's about understanding that if I want life to the fullest, it's not about me obeying God for His do's and don'ts and Him wanting to suck the joy out of life and the fun, and I want to make certain decisions and I want to do this and I want. It's not that. It's not that at all. It's God saying, I want you to have life, and I want you to have life to the fullest, and that's what you want. But what you don't understand, it's not rooted in those choices that you want to make because you don't understand that. You don't understand how those will take you away from me. You don't understand how that robs you of joy, how that robs you of what I want to bless you with. Instead, you're going to a life that is going to bring pain and suffering. Whereas obeying me is just saying, yes, I want to live in harmony with you. And we trust God, and we trust that God knows what is going to bring us life and life to the fullest. Jesus said once again, if you love me, you're going to obey my commands. If you love me, you will obey my commands. So with that being said, I wonder if there are things within our lives where, truth be known, again, we're trying to usurp the Creator, and we want to be the Creator. And instead, that's our temptation, just like it was for Adam and Eve. And that's the temptation of all of us. That's the curse that we live in. That is the curse that we live in. There's a lot at stake here. There's a lot at stake here. A life of meaning and hope and power and satisfaction of purpose. And as I close today, let's end by taking a look at a couple of verses found in Psalm 139 and opening our hearts and our spirits to the Holy Spirit and allowing Him to have freedom to illuminate areas where we may be giving into that temptation, knowing that that's not the life we truly want. We want life to the fullest. And in verses 23 and 24 of Psalm 139, David says this, "Search me, O God, and know my heart, and see if there may be any hurtful way in me, and lead me in the way of life everlasting." I wonder if that would be your prayer today. I wonder if you would have the strength to be vulnerable and transparent and pray that. Search me, O God, know my heart, and if there's any hurtful way in there, would you lead me in the way of life everlasting? Pray on that. Dwell on that this week. Psalm 139, verses 23 and 24. I look forward to spending time with you next week.
Temptation comes my way. When I cannot stand, I'll